Hi, everyone. I guess we'll get started. My name is Blair Fornwald, and I am the Director Curator at the School of Art Gallery. And on behalf of the gallery, I am so pleased to welcome you all to this evening's virtual panel, Orienting Self, Place and History, featuring guest speakers Abigail Ald, Mariana Muñoz Gomez, and Graham Young. This talk is held in conjunction with the gallery's current exhibition, Moving Matter Between Rock and Stone, organized by guest curator Abigail Ald. Moving Matter is up at the School of Art Gallery's main and lobby galleries until October 14th. And we are going to be hosting a reception for this exhibition next Thursday, 1 week from today, from 5 p.m. till 8 p.m. So I hope to see you all there. For those visitors who might be listening only, I am a white femme in my early 40s. I've got short brown hair. It's cut in a mullet. I'm wearing eyeglasses and a black and white striped top with an olive green cardigan on top because it's getting chilly. I'm speaking to you from my office at the School of Art Gallery, which is located on Treaty 1 territory. This is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. It's important, I think, to note that the first thing that you see when you enter the Moving Matter exhibition is a photograph by Iroquois artist Jeff Thomas. It depicts his son Bear, who is looking at a brass plaque which commemorates the historic signing of Treaty 1 in 1871. And this plaque is affixed to the walls of a Tindle Stone fort. On the verso of this wall is another portrait of Bear in front of the plaque, gazing out at the viewer. And in Abigail's inspired curatorial decisions, he's also gazing at Christopher Wall's portrait of the Queen Elizabeth. She's visiting Winnipeg, smiling and standing again in front of a Tindle Stone wall, this ubiquitous marker of place. Treaty 1 took territory from 7 Anishinaabe First Nations to make the land available for settler use and ownership. Our water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, which only last year ended its boil water advisories with the opening of its centralized water treatment facility. This exhibition asks us to think deeply about the lasting impacts of resource extraction and settler colonial nation building. In thinking about these histories, this place, and this material, we must also acknowledge that the harms of settler colonialism are not behind us. They're ongoing, systemic, socially, culturally, and ecologically devastating, and deeply embedded in institutions like ours. Important conversations like this can be catalysts that deepen a shared commitment to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration, and call us to work together to dismantle, decolonize, and build better alternatives that serve all of our communities. Before I turn it over to Abby, who will introduce tonight's speakers and moderate this discussion, I want to acknowledge that the School of Art Gallery is generously supported by the University of Manitoba, the School of Arts faculty and staff, donors, and volunteers. This exhibition and related programming have received additional funding and support from the Canada Council for the Arts and the Manitoba Arts Council. I also want to say thank you to our ASL interpreters, Christina Morden and Shannon Hook-Hansen, for helping make this panel more accessible. Thank you also to School of Arts staff members, Justin Bear and Kaylin Harrison, for their assistance in facilitating this talk. If anyone is having trouble with Zoom, please direct messages to either Justin or Kaylin. They are School of Art Gallery in their names in the chat. You can just direct message them and they will try and help you out. And if you're watching this talk over on YouTube and you have a question at the end of the presentation, you can post it in the comments there and they will relay it over to the panelists here on Zoom. I also want to extend my sincere gratitude to tonight's presenters, Casey Adams, Mariana Muñoz Gomez, and Graham Young. I'm also very grateful to Curator Abigail Ald for organizing this thoughtful, provocative, and well-researched exhibition and its ancillary programs. It's a real honor to be presenting this important work. Abigail Ald is a writer and curator whose work considers human-altered environments. Her research explores how systems of power and relation are reflected in the ways that buildings and cities are constructed, with a particular interest in the relationship between urban environments and the ecosystems that sustain them. Abigail holds an MA in Cultural Studies, Curatorial Practice from the University of Winnipeg, and a Bachelor of Environmental Design from OCAD University. She lives here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Treaty 1 territory, as a descendant of British Canadian settlers. Abigail is also a founding member of Parameter Press, a collective publishing risograph printed artist editions, and is currently writing a nonfiction manuscript about Tyndall limestone. Abigail will also be delivering a curatorial talk on Thursday, September 22nd at 12 p.m. at the Art Lab in room 136. This is the same day as the reception for Moving Matter, which will happen later that night. In conjunction with this exhibition, we will also be hosting, along with the Faculty of Architecture, a forthcoming talk by landscape architect Jane Ma Hutton, and later a virtual panel which will feature artists Vanessa Higgin and Tricia Wozni, who are both in the exhibition. So please visit umanitoba.ca/art for more details on this and other programs that we have for you. Finally, I want to thank all of you for coming to share this virtual space with us tonight. I'm now going to turn it over to Abby, and she will introduce this evening's speakers. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Blair. Thank you for the introduction and for situating this exhibition as it relates to this territory. As an independent curator, my work was hypothetical until it's given life through collaboration. First and foremost with artists whose generosity and trust astonishes me, and through the considerable efforts of the gallery, school, and contract workers who helped realize this exhibition. So a big thank you to all the folks behind this project and to those making this event possible this evening. So to Justin Baer, Kaylin Harrison, our ASL interpreters, Christina Morden and Shannon Hoganson. In addition to the gallery's support, Moving Matter was made possible by project grants from the Canada Council for the Arts and the Manitoba Arts Council, with max funding specifically enabling this virtual programming series. I'd also like to extend a special thank you to Gillis Quarries Limited, who provided stone for some of the work in the exhibition, gave quarry tours to artists, and whose generosity in supporting and opening their archives to my research has enabled this work. The genesis of my interest in Tindle Stone developed with the support of the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation, and my curatorial research began with the Winnipeg Arts Council grant and mentorship with Jenny Western in MAWA's Foundation Mentorship Program. So before we move on to the main programming event, I'm just going to speak briefly about the exhibition. Moving Matter Between Rock and Stone features work by 13 artists: Casey Adams, Christina Benera, Catherine Boyer, Evan Collis, Jason Dehan, Patrick Dunford, Kara Hamilton, Vanessa Hagen, Mariana Muñoz Gomez, Lisa Stinner-Kun, Jeff Thomas, Christopher Wall, and Tricia Wozni. The exhibition is based on my research about Tindle Stone, a trademark building product that has been excavated for construction in this region over the last 180 to 200 years. But this stone is far more than simply a building product. It is a layer of the bedrock in this specific region that has formed a foundation for the accumulation of life and land over millennia. This rock is also ancient matter, having moved across the globe over the last 450 million years, transforming from a shallow equatorial sea into a body of dolomitic limestone called the Red River Formation. The artist in Moving Matter lead a reorientation towards Tindle Stone, offering ways to consider the resonance imbued with human rock relations, as well as the implication of transforming bedrock into a building stone. So I'm thrilled to introduce artists Casey Adams and Mariana Muñoz Gomez and geologist Graham Young, who will each present about their work under the theme of orienting self, place, and history. So what exactly do I mean when describing this panel as offering different ways to orient oneself to the rock formation? My use of the word orient and orientation is based on Sarah Ahmed's book, Queer Phenomenology, Orientations, Objects, Others, which I learned of through Catherine Boyer, another artist in the exhibition. Ahmed's book melds queer studies and phenomenology, the study of experiences. It asks, what does it mean to be orientated? How do we begin to know or to feel where we are or where we are going by lining ourselves up with the features of the grounds we inhabit, the sky that surrounds us, or the imaginary lines that cut through maps? How do we know which way to turn to reach our destination? Ahmed's study emphasizes the here-ness of bodies, how one's own body provides a point of view and zero point from which relations to space and objects out there are perceived, meaning that how space is experienced depends on one's own embodied experiences and orientation toward what is outside one's being. I'm interested in mixing up in a bit and co-opting Ahmed's ideas to think about the rock formation that Tindle Stone comes from as a body, similar to how we think of lakes as bodies of water, and to imagine this rock body as the zero point from which perceptions of time and space extend. In other words, I'm proposing seeing the Red River Formation and Tyndall Stone as an anchor point that orients space and time. So to really also stretch this concept of orientation, I also think of today's presenters as people whose distinct experiences and knowledge provide different ways to orient toward Tyndall Stone and the way it has been folded into human histories. So with that, I'll carry on to the introductions. Each presenter will speak for about 20 minutes, after which we'll convene for a shared discussion period. So feel free to add the questions to the chat, your questions to the chat on Zoom or YouTube as we go, but we'll circle back to those at the end. We're aiming to wrap up around 8:30, but if we go a bit long, feel free to leave knowing that the talk will be recorded for the gallery's YouTube page. So our first presenter of the evening is Dr. Graham Young. Dr. Young has degrees in biology and geology from the University of New Brunswick and the University of Toronto. He carried out postdoctoral research in Newcastle, England, before moving to Winnipeg in 1990 to do research at the University of Manitoba and has worked at the Manitoba Museum since 1993. At the museum, Graham builds collections, deals with public inquiries, and prepares exhibits. He has developed many museum exhibits, including the Ancient Seas Immersive Experience and the Paleosaur exhibits. Graham's research focuses on ancient environments, on the unusual fossils such as jellyfish and horseshoe crabs from sites in northern Manitoba. For his work, Graham has received a Guinness World Record, 4 national and international exhibit awards, and the Bruce Naylor Award for contributions to museum-based history in Canada. He's a research associate of the Royal Ontario Museum and a professional affiliate of the University of Manitoba. Graham's guidebooks about the upper Ordovician limestone, Tindle Stone, have been a significant resource in my learning about this material's geology. And so I'm thrilled that he's joining us to possibly correct any of my misinterpretations, but also to give us really a crash course in understanding this rock from a geologic perspective. So please join me in virtually welcoming Graham.
Well, you can hear me, right? That was great. Thank you, Abby. You've covered a lot of the territory already. This is an interesting experience for me because I've never spoken to an art exhibit audience, and I've also never done a Zoom presentation, so you'll have to bear with me if anything odd happens. When I was asked to give background about Tyndall Stone geology, I thought about it and thought, well, I've studied fossils like this like Tyndall Stone fossils for about 40 years, so I could go a very long time. And I thought, well, I'll try to get it down to a few points. So I've ended up with 7 points, which doesn't sound like much, but I'm afraid I'm still going to try to really keep things moving along here. And if you have questions about anything I talk about, please feel free to ask them afterwards. I'm going to attempt the first slide here.
Well, Graham, do you want to start with sharing your screen?
Yeah, I'm just trying.
Perfect.
Did that come up?
It's coming, I think.
I am screen sharing, it says. That's good?
Yes, we're getting it. Yes, perfect.
Excellent. So Tyndall Stone has this fabulous dichotomy, I think, for most people in Winnipeg. Of course, it's a ubiquitous building stone that we can see everywhere. It makes so many lovely walls on buildings from the past 100+ years. At the same time, for those of us interested in fossils, it's a treasure trove of fascinating fossils, such as this chain coral on the right. And that's the aspect I'm going to focus on tonight. I'm going to zoom you through geological aspects of Tindle Stone and not really talk much about the human side of it. So it's this familiar material that we can see on buildings all over the place. 3 of these photos, of course, are of the Manitoba Legislative Building, which is one of the best places to see Tindle Stone, but also a lovely fossil cephalopod on the bottom right on Tindle Stone, just outside the planetarium at our Manitoba Museum, and many of those buildings in the Civic Complex in downtown Winnipeg are also covered with slabs of Tindle Stone. Again, a fabulous place to see Tindle Stone fossils. So I'm sure this is something that all of you have looked at least perhaps when you were waiting for a bus, because I've certainly seen lots of it in that sort of position. At the same time, Tindle Stone is full of information about a past place that is remarkably different from the modern Manitoba. So we have the modern place that we're familiar with as this rich prairie going to boreal forest, going to Hudson Bay lowlands. But in the distant past, this was a tropical place, and much, or perhaps all of Manitoba has been under the sea on in many different intervals. And Tindle Stone comes from one of the earliest intervals we know of when Manitoba was under the sea. So this is a very different world. It's a world without people. And not only is it a world without people, most of the familiar groups, the things we are used to having around us, just weren't present on the Earth. So there are no mammals, no reptiles, no amphibians, no advanced fishes. There were fishes related to hagfish and lampreys, but nothing like a salmon or a trout, or none of those sorts of fishes. There were no trees, no flowers, no grasses. There were probably lichens and very, very simple plants related to related to mosses. So little life on land, but at the same time, there's a weird dichotomy because there is abundant and diverse life in the world's oceans. So I just put up these couple of pictures of the Churchill shore because that was the closest I could find to a land without life, without much visible life on it. And that Churchill shore was actually land in the Ordovician as well. So it's wonderful we actually have an example in Manitoba. Now, I thought about how I could present this and how I could package it, and I thought I need a nice number of things to talk about, and 7 is a number that I like. So I came up with 7 perspectives on Manitoba Tindle Stone. First of all, just to talk about the age of it. This is, in human terms, a deeply, deeply ancient material. It's something that represents a salt sea. We're very far from the sea where we live here. Yet Tindle Stone every piece of evidence in Tindle Stone tells us about a salt sea. Not only is it a salt sea, we live in a place with some of the coldest winters of any large city on the planet, yet Tindle Stone tells us about a tropical salt sea. Tindle Stone is unique. There are many limestones in Manitoba. There are even other mottled limestones. There are no other limestones that have the precise properties of Tindle Stone. So Tindle Stone does not mean limestone, but Tindle Stone is one of our limestones. Tindle Stone represents one of many past seas, and I know a lot of people have trouble with this, but the sea has been here not just once and not just twice. It's been here over and over again and has left different marine geological deposits behind each time it was here. Tindle Stone was made by life. Almost everything in Tindle Stone is from life. This is not an inorganic material. It's a material that almost vibrates with life. It's rich in life forms and shows tremendous diversity of life. And it captures a critical and exciting time in life's history. Now, I better keep moving here. Well, first of all, Tindle Stone is deeply ancient. And perhaps you get some inkling of it being ancient when you see, when you see some of these very strange fossils, and people have a lot of trouble making sense of these because they don't make sense completely in our modern world. These particular fossils I've put up are things called receptaculitids, and they don't really have any modern relatives. So it's a deeply ancient thing. It's a strange world. Let's just walk down into our ancient world. So here we are in modern Winnipeg a few months from now on the surface of the province. But there are places, if we go to Western Manitoba, where we can start to see a third dimension, where we get the big valleys of Western Manitoba. We start to see where water is cut down into the earth, and we can see a dimension that starts to tell us about the antiquity of this place. Now, these big river valleys in Western Manitoba were cut by flowing water perhaps 10,000 years ago. However, some of these cut down into older material. This is Wawanesa Gorge, which is a lovely spot to go on a summer afternoon. And here the river has cut down in through bedrock that is from the age of dinosaurs. So bedrock that is something like 70 to 90 million years old. And that's very old. But then there are other places in the province. And here are the Tindle Stone quarries where we can see rock that is hundreds of millions of years old. Now I'll give you a graphical depiction of this, of the antiquity of Tindle Stones. This is a geological column. We won't worry too much about the terms, but just to show you, to orient you, you are here. We are at the end of geological time, effectively. Hopefully it continues onward, but for what we can study at the moment, we are at the known end. Now, just before us, which seems a long time ago in human terms, but right up there, right next to the "you are here" arrow, is the entire ice ages. And in fact, on this column I'm showing, and on the left-hand side, by the way, you can note that it goes down to 100 million and 200 million years ago. So getting down to 65 million years ago, we hit the extinction of the dinosaurs. So this is a very, very long time ago for us, obviously, extinction of dinosaurs. But now we're going to take a little walk down into the past a little farther. And we're going way down here to well beyond 400 million, to what's known as the Ordovician period. And about 450 million years ago, this is the age of Tindle Stone. And in fact, it's just a little while after the great diversification of life that we call the Cambrian explosion. So it's a deeply ancient material in human terms. The second thing about Tindle Stone, it represents a salt sea. This is not a freshwater lake. This is not Lake Agassiz. This is a sea that covered the middle of our continent. And we have a lot of evidence for Tindle Stone being from salt sea. First of all, we have all these beautiful life forms in Tindle Stone, and there are a few of the fossils on your right showing some things in a Tindle Stone wall. One of those receptaculitids and a horn coral, and a depiction of life in the Ordovician period. This is from our Ordovician diorama at the museum. Everything in Tindle Stone is a thing that lived in the sea. And that salt sea covered the middle of the continent. I know this picture is a little bit complicated, but there's Winnipeg to show you where you are now. And Winnipeg was on the edge of a marine basin, so a deeper area where the sea covered it and sediment was being deposited. And you can see there was another basin up where Hudson Bay is still a sedimentary basin. But in fact, when the sea was deep, it ran all the way across that mid part of the continent in what's called the Red River Stony Mountain province. As I say, please ask me questions later because I'm going to keep flowing along here. Every fossil we find in Tindle Stone is tropical. So we have the corals and other life forms. These are things that live in that have living relatives in the tropics nowadays. The limestone itself is a tropical material. Limestones like these do not form in waters such as Hudson Bay or the North Atlantic. Limestones of the form of Tyndall Stone form only on tropical seafloors. So the stone itself tells us this was a tropical place. And we have some wonderful reconstructions nowadays of what the world was like at that time. And again, I'll give you Winnipeg. Winnipeg is sitting in a paleocontinent called Laurentia that's actually the entire core of what is still North America. So it's really most of North America, but sitting up near the equator and spun around a bit. And this is simply because you've heard of plate tectonics. The plates are always moving, and we've had enough time that our plate has moved from that tropical location to its currently less than tropical location. If we want to look at North America in a more familiar location, again, our paleocontinent is called Laurentia because it lacks things like the Rocky Mountains to the west. So those hadn't formed yet. And again, Winnipeg is here. And in fact, the equator is reconstructed by different people in slightly different locations. But effectively, Winnipeg and Manitoba Winnipeg was south of the equator. The equator went somewhere up across near Hudson Bay. Hard to believe, but that's what all of the geological evidence shows. Tindle Stone is unique. As I mentioned, it's a material with some unique properties that make it particularly suited to the wonderful use we put it to as a building stone. And yet, it's part of something much, much bigger. So these are the Tindle Stone quarries here at Garson, a fascinating place to visit for many reasons. This is a column which is simply a cut through the earth, and down on the bottom right here, we've got a line that runs A to A prime, and it shows this line runs from southwest Manitoba up across the Winnipeg area up to eastern Manitoba. And the column shows what we like to call layer cake stratigraphy, which means that if you cut down into the earth anywhere in this part of Manitoba or farther west, the rock units are in a particular order, and they're like the layers of a cake. And as you go down into the earth, you go into older rocks. So we can see that our Tindle Stone, which is part of the Red River Formation, I'll just outline that, is down here in the Ordovician period. And as we go farther west in Manitoba, there are many younger units above it, but farther east in Manitoba, for instance, right here at Winnipeg and north and east from here, we have these rocks exposed at the Earth's surface, which is why we can quarry Tindle Stone northeast of Winnipeg. So this is just taking that Ordovician piece of the column. So again, we're looking at a section down into the earth, a hypothetical section. And this is showing all the limestone and other sedimentary units of that age in southern Manitoba. So this is for the Winnipeg area. Again, I'll outline, that's that unit called the Red River Formation. And the Red River Formation is simply a set of limestone beds that share particular characteristics and that were deposited in a defined interval of time. So it's a rock unit that geologists can map. And that unit is split into a series of subunits, which we call members. And the Selkirk member, which was first recognized in the Selkirk area, is the unit that includes Tindle Stone. So Tindle Stone somewhere in the mid part of this area, this unit, but it's not the entire member. You'll see that that member is something like 30 meters thick. So it's quite a thick unit, about 100 feet thick. This is remarkable, actually, how thick all these rocks are going down into the earth below us. At the bottom of that same unit, the Red River Formation, is what's called the Doghead member, named for Doghead, which is a promontory on Lake Winnipeg, and it's the unit that you can see at places like Hecla Island and Matheson Island, or even around Victoria Beach if you're up in those parts of the lake in the summer. Another mottled limestone, but a little different from our Tindle Stone. Cathead member is a unit we can see mostly way up the lake on the North Basin. A very different looking rock. It's not mottled. It has very strange fossils in it, like those seaweeds on the right. So fossil seaweeds, very strange things to find. And above Tindle Stone is what's called the Fort Garry member, which can be seen along some of the rapids of the Red River north of Winnipeg and also at quarries near Oak Hammock Marsh. So Tindle Stone is one piece of this bigger set of units. And I'll just note there are other limestones above that Red River formation. So we have the Stony Mountain Formation, which of course is at Stony Mountain and consists of a recognized set of members or units. And these are so beautifully color-coded. I love these. You can just tell them apart by going into the quarry and looking for the right color. So you've got the red one, then you've got the orangey one, and then you've got the pale buff one at the top. Very different looking limestones from Tindle Stone, and very beautiful fossils, but quite different looking from Tindle Stone fossils. These are wonderfully collectible fossils, of course, and maybe some of you have been lucky enough to see some of these turn up if you happen to have stone delivered from that area. Finally, at the top, we get the rocks that are at the Stonewall Quarry Park, which are still in that Ordovician period of geological time, but they're a little younger than that Red River Formation and the Stony Mountain Formation. So they're right near the top of that period. And again, they have some different fossils in them. These are a couple of nice corals that were collected from the Stonewall Quarry back in the old days in about the 1950s. As I said, I know I'm rushing through this and I apologize, so please question me afterwards. So really what this all tells us is Tindle Stone is one of many limestones in the region. These are differentiated by having different characteristics, different ages, and you can actually map them as geological units, but it has unique properties, in particular that ability to be slabbed into large blocks, cut with a saw, and then processed into this beautiful construction material. So it's one of many limestones, but it's by far the best as a human use material. Now, as I mentioned before, the sea hasn't just been here once. It's been here many times. So here we have those Ordovician age rock units again, and this is just one of our many periods of geological time. And we can put together what's called a sea level curve, which simply shows whether the sea was high or low at times. You've heard nowadays that the sea level's rising, that we're in danger of having things flooded in coastal regions. This is a very bad thing for humanity, but the fact is the sea is always rising or falling. So if it wasn't rising, it would be falling. It's never a static thing. The sea is a dynamic piece of our world. And in the past, seas came and went. So what these cycles show is on the left, a low sea level, on the right, a high sea level, in other words, deeper seas. Where there were deeper seas, they covered more of the middle of North America. And our Selkirk member, which is where Tindle Stone is during one of the deep phases of one of those sea level cycles. So the sea has come and gone and come and gone. And in fact, if we look at global sea level, the sea has gone up and down many times in the past 540 million years since the start of complex life on the planet. But interestingly, this is where Tindle Stone is in the whole picture. According to one of the curves, Tindle Stone is close to the deepest ever for the world's oceans, the highest ever. There was no glacier on any pole, and the seafloor was high in places, so that as a result, the global sea level was very high, and there was sea all across the mid part of the continent. Tindle Stone was made by life. I saw this was on a street in Western Manitoba where someone had kindly written in chalk on the sidewalk, "Note the fossils." And Tindle Stone is all fossils. There are a bunch of different Tindle Stone fossils on the left. There's a coral on the top right of those. Down in the middle is a lovely big Cephalopod related to modern chambered nautilus, related to squids and octopus also. That strange, what's sometimes called a sunflower coral, but isn't actually an extinct group with no close living relatives. A horn coral on the bottom right. And I just wanted to note on the top left, those are microfossils, like tiny teeth of a hagfish relative. And limestones like Tindle Stone are packed with microfossils. Sometimes you can get 1,000 fossils out of a very few kilograms of stone by digesting it with acid. So it's full of abundant life forms. Not
Graham?
only, yes.
I'm gonna get you to wrap up regretfully.
I'm sorry. I will
Okay.
go very quickly.
Awesome, thank you.
Tindle Stone is made by life. The mottles themselves are from life. So every mottle you see in Tindle Stone is a burrow of a creature like a shrimp. And then if you look at weathered Tindle Stone, everything in it is tiny fossils. So these are tiny sea lilies. So really, if you look closely at a Tindle Stone wall, everything is life. Finally, it captures a critical time in life history. Life has gone through many diversifications and extinctions. This is our Ordovician period, which was one of the first big diversifications in the history of life. Tindle Stone stands at the pinnacle of that diversification. A remarkable, diverse life had evolved in the seas. And sadly, just afterward, as represented by this red arrow, there was a huge extinction. And this was sadly one of the biggest extinctions in the history of life. And that's here, this end Ordovician extinction. So 86% of species in the seas became extinct shortly after. And that was related to global cooling, not global warming. So what I really wanted to get across to you is that Tindle Stone is very complicated stuff. It tells many stories and it is packed with light, with evidence of life. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Graham. I'm sorry to butt in there rudely.
Oh, that's
to the end, but
that's fine. I got too interested in the material.
Me too. You said lots of things there, particularly that highest sea level that were new to me. So it's very exciting. All right, so I'm going to introduce our next speaker this evening, Casey Adams. Casey Adams is a Winnipeg-based artist who graduated from Concordia University with a BFA in studio arts. She is Anishinaabe, Innu, and British, and a relational maker, a creator whose work connects to Indigenous axiology and epistemology. Adams is an educator, activist, community member, and mentor, and creates work exploring technology and its relationship to Indigenous identity and knowledge systems. Adams has exhibited extensively and participated in residencies in Canada, the US, and Australia. Her work is in several permanent collections, nationally and internationally. Adams was awarded the Winnipeg Arts Council's Making a Mark Award and Canada's Senate 150 medal based on her Perception photo series. This past August, Adams led the plug-in ICA Summer Institute Water Knowledge, which guided a group of women identifying and non-binary artists in a workshop that began on the shores of Grand Rapids, Manitoba, and focused on harvesting clay by hand to create traditional Indigenous water vessels. I'm thrilled to be passing the Zoom stage to Casey to share her practice and a bit about her work, Jagged Worldviews, which incorporates clay technologies that connect to an important part of the Red River Formation's extent, the limestone outcrop that once broke the Red River into rapids and contributed to this being a gathering place for thousands of years. In 1910, the St. Andrews Lock and Dam in Lockport inundated the rapids. The riverbank along here holds the sherds of Black Duck and Selkirk pottery, some of which informs Casey's practice. Please join me in virtually welcoming Casey.
Great, thank you, Abby. How long do I have until? Still 7:55?
You know, I think go for 20 minutes, so like just till about 8. Is that all right?
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. Okay, I'm going to share my screen because I have images to show you. got to go to the first slide. Okay, I have a script, but I might be diverting from that script. So, Tanse Totimak Minotakosen Kapapamamat Kip Mikasuasqueo Nitisinikason ni Mama Judy Adams Estegaso Ochke Wisipi ni Itutimak. So I said, hello, all my relations. Good evening. My name is Flying Overhead in Circles Eagle Woman. That's my Cree name. Also, I am of the Bear Clan. Like it was announced before, I'm Anishinaabe, Innu, and British descent. My mother is Judy Adams, nee Taylor, and she's tied to Fisher River Cree Nation. My father's family is connected to Peguis First Nation, and my parents and my siblings, all my family, were raised in the town of Selkirk. I was taught when introducing yourselves, you include where you come from to signal your relations with the people you are meeting. So welcome all my relations, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for I want to say thank you to my fellow speakers and Abby for putting this all together, and Blair as well. Okay, so I'm going to go to my next slide. So I was going to share a little bit of information about myself to give the context of my research and art production. So I might have to slash a bit of this. But I was raised in a settler society with a public school education in a military home. However, there were traces of my Indigenous teachings that my parents passed on to me. My father taught me about pride for his culture, Indigenous culture, especially love, the family unit, really strong. Very much humility. We weren't allowed to brag or talk about our accomplishments. And he had a gift of, or he still does have this incredible gift of storytelling. From my mother, I learned wisdom and courage and got her ability to make things. So from her side of the family, I come from a family of females, a long line of Indigenous women who are problem solvers and can make anything, beautiful objects out of nothing. So I'm going to talk about my clay production. While pursuing my bachelor's degree in fine arts at Concordia University, I took a clay course, and my blood memory was triggered the first time I touched the medium. I intuitively understood it, and with all the nuances, and I ended up excelling in this format. And in 1999, I moved back to Montreal and took a course at the Manitoba Museum to learn about Indigenous pottery made by my ancestors. So my interest stemmed from my desire to understand my Indigenous culture, because my knowledge was very limited. So this course was in the basement of under fluorescent lights with commercial clay. And I walked away feeling disconnected from my ancestors, quite the opposite. And this is because I was aware of the beautiful pottery from our Southern cousins. And I couldn't understand, and I'm being very disrespectful to my ancestors, but I couldn't understand why their work was so plain. And I felt that it was paled in comparison. Of course, this is just an ignorant statement at the time. I'm not going to talk about this work here. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So fast forward to 2014, and I was invited to travel to Minnesota by Jenny Western and the Manitoba Craft Council to learn about Indigenous pottery from experimental archaeologist Grant Goltz. We went out on the land, sourced dry clay, and you can see us along this embankment, and we're collecting the clay. We processed it, we built a vessel the same day, and he showed us how to fire pottery in an open pit. And I realized during this time that I was learning the same information that I had received from the Manitoba Museum. Grant Goltz was actually part of the curriculum in building and teaching how about Indigenous pottery. And I've put the two and two together. So the difference was Goltz used Indigenous pedagogies, teaching by showing, using materials from the land, not a store, and Indigenous worldviews he picked up from elders and knowledge keepers, as well as his own experiments that he was doing. So even though he was a settler, he came from a place of appreciation towards Indigenous technology, philosophy, and innovation, while the Manitoba Museum also had an appreciation of Indigenous culture and wanted to pass on the same knowledge. And not to say that the museum wasn't interested in doing the same things as Grant, but I just wanted to show that place and methodology makes a world of difference between the two experiences. So while I was receiving the same content, the material, the understanding of why they made the vessels the way they did could only happen when I actually went out on the land and participated in the same processes that my ancestors did. As scholar Radhika Mohan Ram talks about spatial approaches, racial difference is also spatial difference. So my understanding of Indigenous pottery was greatly influenced by space, place, and methodology. If anyone wants to see what I learned, you can Google Rethinking Black Duck Pottery. It's on the PBS website. It's a really good watch. Okay, so the Manitoba Craft Council also organized a visit with Kevin Brownlee, the head curator at the Manitoba Museum, so that we could observe their pottery collection. And in the slide, you can see that I am holding an ancestral vessel in their collection, and it's incredibly thin, which inspired me to try to recreate these vessels. And what you don't understand about this clay, and what I didn't understand, was that this clay is very difficult to work with. It wants to collapse. It's not very elastic. It's difficult, and it's almost impossible to get it that thin. And so me with 20 years of clay experience, I found it difficult to make a thin vessel as thin as the one you see on the right-hand side. I'm comparing the one pottery sherd to my own vessel. And you can see that I'm not quite there. This by coincidence is the first pottery sherd I ever found out on the land. Along the waterways of Manitoba, there are pottery sherds all over the place, which is very exciting. So I started to learn about the production of pottery that included cord wrap paddle and anvil technique and the twist bag and hoop technique. The slide shows the nettle plant, Grant, and also Grant's twist bag in action, his deer leather and willow hoop. And there's a picture of clay along the riverbank. And what I wanted, just in response to what Graham was talking about, one of the things that you cannot have in your clay is limestone, because when it reaches a certain temperature, the limestone turns to powder. And when we were up in Grand Rapids doing a water residency, I was teaching them about the same processes of collecting clay and building vessels and firing it. And we were shown a spot where there was a white kind of beige clay, and I suspected it was limestone, but we tried it anyways, and we made a whole bunch of chalk, which was really kind of funny. But it was a learning lesson. Like, it was something that we needed to understand. So for future, when we're making, this is what the ancestors did as well. So as an educator, the two experiences from the Manitoba Museum, and by the way, I think the Manitoba Museum needs to be supported, and it's holding a lot of our ancestors and keeping them and protecting them. I know that's a contentious issue, but I'm a big fan of the Manitoba Museum. It's just this one experience. I'm just showing the difference between the two experiences and how important it is, land-based learning is. So I needed to make sure that I needed to learn about everything that it took to build a vessel. And that included learning about water. What's water's role in the building of these vessels? What is the role of the grandfather rocks? We call them grandfather rocks because, as Graham was talking about, these rocks at one point in time had life. Our grandfather rocks, we think of them as animate objects that have all this life experience that we can learn from it. So I needed to learn about how clay was formed, what kind of role the waters played, whether or not ceremony or was infused into the vessels. Here I am at the Nibe gathering at Bannock Point in Whiteshell Provincial Park. And at the Nibe gathering, elders come together to teach about water, which is Nibe. And it's important to understand how water is life and how we need to protect those waters. And so I activate that knowledge through the making of clay vessels, because once you collect clay from the land, use the water from the river, build your vessels, and then fire it, it changes you. It creates a whole nother learning experience. So as an educator, I felt that was really important to bring this to my community. This is a map. Let's see, how much time do I have left? Okay, I've got 5 minutes left. This is a map of waterways. It was drawn by Chache Heweti in May 1806. And what I found really profound about this waterways is he was asked to list the different communities around him that the fur traders could trade with them. And this is the map he drew. And he listed the different communities, which were all like represented by these circles, and those circles are lakes. And then the lines that connect them are rivers. And the jagged lines are rapids where you have to portage, which I think is just a beautiful piece. I'll go into it, but water is an important component to understanding Indigenous epistemologies. So throughout this process of learning about Indigenous pottery, I was also learning about myself. And on the left is on the left is not my photo. I grabbed it from, which site was it? Yeah, sorry, I got lost here. I can't find my, okay, well anyways, I'm just gonna go off script now. So on the left side, this came from a Dene book talking about traditional knowledge and about how the left side was my basic education, my public school education, planning as a guide, creating outer realities, analytical, deductive reasoning, left-brain realisms. But I did not excel and I did not do well. And what I found out throughout this whole journey of learning about Indigenous pottery was that I am more on the right side. I'm a more right brain creative person. I have visions as a guide. Traditional knowledge is important to me. So learning about these waters and these rocks was like an important understanding of who I am as well. This picture is the different processes. Here's the clay that I've collected and processed. These are my tools that I use to build my clay vessels. They're all pieces from the land. This is one of the clay vessels that I've made, and then this is the fire. And what I've learned from a knowledge keeper just this past weekend was the importance of air, water, ice, earth, and fire, and how they're all enacted. And that clay is not a utilitarian endeavor. It's not just a clay vessel that holds something. It contains knowledge systems. It contains spirit. In many ways, we enact it and we animate it through ceremony and song. And there's an archaeologist, Mary, okay, I'm missing her last name, but she just told me about a story that when you're done with a clay vessel, you bury it, because then it's when you no longer need that vessel, or when somebody dies and that vessel needs to be buried with them, that vessel dies as well, and it needs to be buried. So I thought that was really beautiful. Which leads me to this work. This is an actual heavy Tindle Stone that I was going to actually carve out of. I was going to make something out of it. And I love how Graham was talking about how it comes from life. And this is an Anishinaabe way and an Inuit way of thinking, that these grandfathers are animated, and how they've been constructed and cubed and turned into these like structures, these colonial structures. And so this cube is sitting on one of my clay vessels. There's no magic behind it. It's one of my clay vessels that I learned how to make following in the footsteps of my ancestors. And it's holding up this, I don't even know, I think it's like 50 pounds or 60 pounds, and it's holding this clay vessel. Abby and I were worried that it would break, but I think that would have been fine as well. I'm hoping it's still up. Am I getting a thumbs up from Abby?
I think so. That's the last time I checked.
So I hope people come and see it. This whole journey has really taught me, I like to say that the first part of my life has been about learning my settler side. And my second half of my life is about learning about my Indigenous side, that intuitive, that creative side, learning about how I'm related, the interrelationality, how I fit within that large spider web, where everything in the universe is in that spider web, and where is my connection to it all. And but also honoring that everything else around me is connected to me too, so that what I do to those connections are really what I do to myself. So with that, I'm going to say to all of you, Tapikiwas, Nini na Skoman. So thank you from my heart.
Thank you, Kate.
There we go.
Great. Thank you very much. That was you took us on such a journey all the way to this piece, which was, I'm amazed at how you were able to tell us that with what felt with like some really intimate details. But in this time, in such a, yeah, so thank you. Next, we're going to move on to Mariana Muñoz Gomez. Mariana Muñoz Gomez is an artist, writer, and curator. They are a settler of color based in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Treaty 1 territory, which includes unceded lands of Dene and Dakota peoples, ancestral territories of Anishinaabe, Iniwak, and Anishinaabe people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Mariana's lens-based practice involves a variety of media, including text works, screen prints, video art, and photography. Their interests include language, identity, diaspora, and displacement, and these topics intersections with coloniality, temporality, relation, and place. Mariana is a founding member of Carnation Scene, curator at Window Winnipeg, and current curator in residence at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, Helmut. I'm very pleased to have Mariana share about their practice and two works in the exhibition, Avalar entre rocas and Mapping Elsewhere. By contemplating two rock bodies at either ends of Turtle Island, Tindle Stone and a volcanic stone from Morelos, Mexico, Mariana's work reflects on how histories are carried by human bodies that move and are displaced by human-led dispersals of stone, and by rock bodies too, which are, after all, ever so slowly in motion. Please join me in virtually welcoming Mariana.
Thank you for that introduction, Abby, and thank you, Casey and Graham, for your presentations, both super interesting, and I've been really excited for this event to just learn from both of you. So I was taking notes throughout your presentations, and it would be nice to talk about it maybe at the opening reception or something a bit more. I also just want to say thank you to the School of Art for hosting the exhibition and the event. And let me see, I'll share my screen here to get my presentation going. Okay, I think that should be good. And so to start off my presentation, I have a few map images to show you. And as Abby mentioned, my work for this exhibition brings together stone from the north and south of Turtle Island, or North America, into dialogue about their social and natural histories, as far as I understand those histories. So the first image I'll show you is actually Cuernavaca, Morelos in Mexico. But to tell you a bit about my home, or my homes, I grew up in Winnipeg, and my family and I moved here when I was 3. I moved from Mexico, and I've been very fortunate and privileged to visit my family in Mexico every few years since we moved. And one of the places that we've ended up spending most of our time has been Cuernavaca in the state of Morelos. And this is the my maternal family's side city. This is where my mom grew up with her family. And some of my dad's family lives in the neighboring state of Puebla. And in my last few visits to Mexico, more independently as an adult, I've also spent some time in Mexico City, and my dad's parents and grandparents live there as well. And you'll see kind of on the map how close they are to each other in a couple of slides. So this first place I'm showing you again is Cuernavaca on Google Maps. And I included the description over here, the quick facts from Google Maps. I just thought it was interesting. I don't think the relationship to tourism necessarily is in this artwork in the exhibition so much, but this kind of tourism approach is something that I think about, thinking about both Mexico, and then you'll see in the next slide I have this kind of similar shot of Winnipeg. So I'll just read out what it says here. It says, Cuernavaca is the lush capital of Mexico's Morelos state, cradled by the Teposteco Mountains south of Mexico City. The colonial city center features the 16th century Palace of Cortés, former home of Spanish conqueror Hernán Cortés, and now a history museum with murals by Mexican artist Diego Rivera. Just southwest is Cuernavaca Cathedral, in a 1500s walled monastery complex with a mural depicting Mexico's first saint. And this next slide is Winnipeg. So you'll see a big contrast in the landscape, which is kind of interesting to look at. There's a contrast in how the city is organized or how the landscape is organized. And looking at this view of Winnipeg, obviously Winnipeg is in the prairies where Cuernavaca has more mountain range, I guess, surrounding it. It's also interesting to me that in this image, which is a satellite image, just thinking about human and the rest of the natural world interactions, you can see the river coming up through the city. And actually, I can't really see the other river, but I just thought it was interesting that as it gets closer to the city, it's harder to follow the trail of the river. And I'll just read out the quick facts as well from Winnipeg. So Winnipeg is the capital of the Canadian province of Manitoba. Its heart is the Forks, a historic site at the intersection of the Red and Assiniboine rivers, with warehouses converted to shops and restaurants, plus ample green space dedicated to festivals, concerts, and exhibits. Nearby, the Exchange District is known for its well-preserved early 20th century architecture and numerous art galleries. And this next slide, I just wanted to show you these two places in relation to each other, obviously very far away from each other. And so these are the two places where the stone in this artwork comes from. And I'll show you a view of some of the artwork that's at the School of Art Gallery. This is a picture as it was at Blinkers last year. And you'll see some Tindle Stone on the floor there. And the other stone that you're seeing on the walls is Volcanic Rock from Mexico. And this imagery is printed on a thin sheet of washi, which is a thin type of Japanese paper. And I liked how thin it is, and it's adhered directly to the wall, so it kind of becomes part of the wall. You might be able to see some orange text on the wall, but probably not, because I made it kind of difficult to see on purpose. It's orange text on an orange wall. But the text is a narrative. It's a kind of poetic reflection about these two stones, noticing similarities and differences, reflecting on the history they have seen and been a part of, and reflecting on how history is written and can erase certain realities and narratives. And it's written in Spanish and English, the text on the wall. And I'll also point out that the imagery on the walls here are composite photographs. So that means that multiple images make up the one image that you're looking at. And it's multiple photos of the same one or two walls at my grandparents' house in Cuernavaca. And these images kind of trick your eyes. At first, they might seem straightforward, but the more time you spend with them, like you'll notice this window here doesn't really make sense to have a window on a stone wall, or these plants kind of cut off very abruptly, just not naturally. There's different perspectives all in one image. So there's some hints that they're not straightforward images, they're manipulated digital photos. And the next slide I'll show you here is an unaltered picture at my grandparents' house. It's an interior view of the entrance. So this is one of the photos that I used to make those composite images. And these rocks are volcanic rocks, at least the ones that are dark gray and very rough and porous. And I'm not really sure about the variation in color. I assume some of these rocks, like this light gray one in the middle, doesn't seem as porous, so it might just be a totally different kind of rock. And then, yeah, I don't know much about volcanic rock and like color variation, but I assume maybe different minerals involved can equal different colors. And then I just want to show you a few other places where I've seen this kind of wall, because obviously at my grandparents' house, I've become very familiar with it. But when I started working on this project, I knew that I had seen it in other places in Mexico. So I've seen it in public settings or domestic settings, like in homes or exterior of these buildings. This might be a residential building here. And this is actually a still from a video piece I have in the Moving Matter exhibition. And this looks like someone's home, so the exterior of someone else's home. And so this is the cathedral in Mexico City's Zócalo, which is the main square downtown. And I included some other images of where I've seen the stone in more like official or institutional or government buildings. So if we zoom in a little bit, I'm just guessing, but it looks like some kind of similar stone used in the back here. And I also have some pictures of Hernán Cortés's palace, which was mentioned in that Google like tourism description. It's in Cuernavaca. And so Cortés arrived in Mexico in 1519 and was interested in looking for gold. And so he made his way to the Aztec city of Tenochtitlan, which is now Mexico City. And very condensed history after a series of events and conflicts. He ended up starving the city to a point of surrender in 1521. So in these pictures of his palace in Cuernavaca, you can see it's a very eclectic kind of approach to how these walls were built. Like there's some very organized, like rectangular bricks in some places, and some more of that more mosaic style approach to putting stones together. And I also just thought I would point out, so these pictures are from 2015. This next picture is from 2018, and I just thought it might be interesting for you to see how the space is used. So it's a museum inside, and there's usually a market on the side of it. And I guess in this visit, 2018, for whatever reason, the market was all over in front of the building as well. And this next slide illustrates a practice that relates to how Hernán Cortés's palace was built as well. So before Cortés or the Spanish conquistadors came to Mexico and after, there has been a practice of cultures establishing dominance and power by building over each other's structures in what is now known as Mexico. So for instance, Cortés's palace was built over a Tlahuica ruler's palace. And so often structures would be demolished, the materials would be recycled to build other structures. In the case of the Spanish, often churches and palaces. And this image is the Plaza de las Tres Culturas in Mexico City, Plaza of the Three Cultures. Oh yeah, and I just wanted to mention that it's, in my experience, in my visits to Mexico, there's a lot of these like older sites or archaeological sites. It seems pretty common, they're everywhere. So here in this plaza, the three cultures that we see are this pre-Columbian or pre-Cortesian structures. There's the Spanish colonial structures with the church here. And then there's the modern Mexican culture, contemporary Mexican culture all around it as well. And so a bit more history here. Mexican Independence Day is September 16th, and it marks Mexico's independence from Spain. There's also the Mexican Revolution, which lasted from 1910 to 1920. And Mexico's revolution ended a dictatorship and established Mexico as a republic. And I just wanted to give you a bit of timeline to note that the revolution happened in the early 20th century. So contemporary Mexican identity might be thought of by some people as being shaped by these events and coming to fruition in the modern period or in the mid 20th century. Here's a view of the Popocatépetl volcano. And in this picture, it's overlooking the city of Cholula in the state of Puebla. And I've been to this hill that we're looking at. It's another archaeological site called Tlachihualtepetl. It's the largest pyramid in volume by volume in the world, and the largest pyramid site in the Americas, something I learned recently on Wikipedia. And Tlachihualtepetl is at the base of this hill. And the church that you see here is another circa 1500s church built at the top of this archaeological site. So this slide shows you how close this volcano is to the places that I visit or call home in Mexico. And it makes sense that these areas would include structures built from volcanic stone. Oh, and I think I have another slide here. Yeah, just to show you where the volcano is. Oh, and excuse my cat in the background. I'm not sure if you can hear him. But the Popocatépetl volcano is down here, and there's a dormant volcano up here, Iztaccíhuatl, and Cuernavaca is over here. Mexico City is up here, and Puebla is over here. So those are kind of the places that I would visit the most in Mexico. And I'll show you some views of my work again here. I've mostly included images of this installation called A Volar Entre Rocas. But in Moving Matter, I also have a book and a video piece. So I think I have, oh, yeah, I'll just show you a bit of a close-up of the orange text on the orange wall there. And a little view of how it's installed in Moving Matter. And then I have just a couple screenshots from the video piece. So some of the footage is very quotidian or everyday, like these stills of gardens. There's also footage from the area outside the church at the top of the hill in Cholula. So the image of the volcano with the church, this is me at the church looking down onto the city. And the video also contains tour bus footage in downtown Mexico City. And the tour bus audio includes historical facts of the area. And then the artist book in the exhibition is called Mapping Elsewhere, which explores these same topics in a different way. And I have a few images of our visit to Gillis Quarries that I went to last fall with Abby and Catherine Boyer, who's also in the exhibition. And I know I was thinking Graham would probably have a lot of pictures of Tindle Stone, but I included a few more of fossils and just interesting examples at the quarries. And I also wanted to show you where this stone is from. And it was interesting hearing Graham describing the stone as full of life. And I know when we visited the quarry, Catherine and I were surprised at how full of life this area was. So with all these plants somehow growing out of the stone. And I have a few pictures, of the stone outside before it's processed. So you can see some fossils even here in these pictures, and there's these plants growing up out of these cracks and crevices in the stone. Here's another picture of this rough stone, and I have a zoom in to the fossils there. And this one was another piece of stone that we walked by outside, and I thought it was interesting. You can see some insect making a web in there in this fossil that looks like it's been crystallized. And then this is a really nice, I think Graham's presentation included this kind of fossil as well, just a really nice looking fossil. And then I think I have a couple of examples, of different buildings that use Tindle Stone. So everything I've learned about Tindle Stone is pretty much through Abby and through resources that she shared with me. So thank you so much, Abby. And in one of those resources, it mentioned that the Winnipeg Land Titles building was one of the first buildings designed with Tindle Stone in this way, or maybe to use it aesthetically in this way. And Tindle Stone is seen all across Canada. Like the volcanic stone, it's also used in domestic or private spaces, as well as in public or institutional spaces. And this is a picture of Tindle Stone used at the Ottawa Parliament building. And I have a couple of pictures at the Manitoba legislature and surrounding grounds. So this is just a close-up of some spot of the legislature. And then this is the statue of Louis Riel with the base built out of Tindle Stone. And then I also have a picture of the stone fort at Lower Fort Garry here. Again, in one of those resources, I learned that a stone that's similar to Tindle Stone. So I'm not sure if it's slightly different than Tindle Stone, or maybe it was Tindle Stone before it got trademarked, was used at the stone fort. And this is the site where Treaty 1 was signed by Nahiawak and Anishinaabe representatives and representatives of the British Crown. So essentially, in my artworks in this exhibition, I'm using art as a way to process my relationship to these places I call home, as well as to learn more about these places. And in the orange text on the orange walls, I write about learning some of this history about these places I call home as an adult. And of course, learning about history through a colonial lens in the education system I grew up in. And processing how the histories that have been erased from dominant narratives intertwine with my presence in both places that I call home. I consider both the volcanic stone from around Morelos, Puebla, and Mexico City, and the Tyndall Stone from Manitoba, their use in domestic spaces as well as institutional spaces, their use in the establishment of power, their use in the creation of home, and all the history that they have been witness to. So I think that's my last slide there. I'll stop sharing. And pass it back to Abby, I think.
Yes, thank you, Mariana. Oh, thank you, Mariana. It's a great presentation. I was surprised, particularly it's like maybe just a weird visual reference, but you're at the beginning of your presentation when you drew the line between places, or the flight, I guess, Google Flight. It reminded me, just like in a visual way, of Graham's slides at the very beginning of these sections, and ways of the section lines through places. Okay, so we are going to open it up to questions now. So I think we might have a bit of a quiet chat right now. We'll let them take a look to see if people have any questions. Before I launch into anything, I wonder if any of you presenters have questions or responses to each other's presentations. I'm putting you a bit too much on the spot. Okay, well,
I can respond to that comment about the stone at Lower Fort Garry.
Oh, great, perfect.
Because it's also in the Selkirk member, so it's in the same unit as Tindle Stone, but it's actually a bit younger. Because the stones are all like a we talk about that layer cake stratigraphy, but it's a tilted cake, and it's tilted westward by about 3 degrees, which means as you go westward, the rocks get younger. So it's a similar stone to Tindle Stone, but younger, and the fossils are a bit different in it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and and the restoration work that's been done in the recent years is using stone from the Tyndall quarries. Is that right? That's the wrong question for you.
Well, I've
Yeah.
talked to the stone. Todd Braun is a stonemason who did some work on that, and I think they did reuse as much old stone as they could from the fort, and possibly from the Selkirk area, because the Selkirk stone was another stone that is more similar to the fort stone. But yeah, I think they did use some Tindle Stone. Oh, Donna Gillis has an answer for us, and she's the expert. It is supply. Okay, thanks, Donna.
Okay.
So,
Okay, there we go. Perfect.
Donna's the expert on
Thank
any
you.
of that.
Yeah. I guess this is a bit of a clarifying question, but I was curious about, because as Casey had talked about the limestone present at Grand Rapids, and my understanding is that the Red River Formation extends and curves up into Saskatchewan around that area, which has always, I think, both because of, I'm always interested, we think about being very specific and related to the quarries and where it's exposed, but I think it's really helpful to think of it as this being, like, I keep using the analogy of a body of water that exists underneath us, just thinking of in that homogeneous way. But that, and also thinking of these, because I have, in my research, identified what used to be the rapids along the Red River in what's now Lockport as being in a significant site, and also Grand Rapids where there's a hydro dam. So thinking about this connection between those two places that are, interesting. So anyway, I'm very curious whether that's just my, some incorrect links I've made, or.
The stone right at Grand Rapids is actually a bit younger. It's Silurian. You can see mottled stone similar to Tindle Stone if you go down a very rough road I can't remember the name of the place that goes down to the lakeshore, some distance north of Grand Rapids, down at the lakeshore. So we're at Grand Rapids, you're a little west of those Ordovician limestones, you're into Silurian limestones.
Okay.
While I was up there, I wish I had some photos with me that I could put on my phone and share with you, but there are the rock formations, the limestone formations where it's stacked, and how a lot of the community hold and cherish that area because faces have been carved, not by them, but just through the weather, that these faces have emerged, these kind of profiles. And I know Sarah Crawley's on here, so she can attest to that. And sadly, it's almost like a mourning when those limestone faces collapse, because it is a soft stone and it disappears. I just also wanted to share a little personal story. We would go, my family would, we're connected to Matheson Island, so my parents would take me up there all the time, and they would collect the Tindle Stone that has been worn away, and it's rounded, the edges, and they're flat. And I always call them they look like cheddar cheese to me, like a sort of marbled cheese. And my family actually used them to construct a backing for our wood stove, and a platform for a wood stove. So Tyndall Stone has been an important part of my family history, which is fairly recent. And I didn't realize that there was Tyndall Stone in the rapids near that Lockport area. And Abby, you had said that it was used to help build Lower Fort Garry. Did you not?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Graham is clarifying a bit that it's adjacent on that scale. Is that right, in the sense?
It's a little younger than Tindle Stone. It's very close to what used to be called Selkirk Stone. There were there were quarries at East Selkirk, and if you look at a lot of the foundations of late 19th century buildings in downtown Winnipeg in the Exchange, you'll see a stone that's similar to Tindle Stone, but it's not quite the same. It weathers a little more orange to my eye. And that's generally Selkirk Stone, because those buildings date from before the quarrying at Garson.
Mm-hmm.
And
and I guess,
I was going to say, and your stone up at Matheson is actually from the Doghead member. So it's older. So it's older than Tindle Stone. So it's a different mottled limestone that's similar but older.
Nice.
But all, yeah, so I guess Doghead is all within this Red River Formation.
Right.
I think that's the thing where I get around. I am calling Tindle Stone as a stone that's part of the Red River Formation that is a bit larger than the members. I often, and like, you know, maybe that's debatable. But my interest in that is because I think talking about it as part of that larger classification allows thinking about how it's not just specific to that quarrying environment that started in around the 1890s, and connecting it to a little bit earlier quarrying to be how the stone was used in Red River frame building as a material, in plaster and in stonework, like foundation work in plaster fireplaces. So in the mid 1800s, both, and thinking about it as not just a building material that it begins related to commercial quarrying. Yeah, so I'm gonna just take a look here.
Yeah, we got a couple of questions.
Okay, so there's a question for you, Graham, from Megan McLeod. Graham, is there any Ordovician stone found elsewhere in the world that is similar to Tyndall Stone?
Well, yeah, Tindle Stone, that kind of mottling is a trace fossil, or a burrow that we typically give it the scientific name thalassinoides, and it's in that late Ordovician. There's kind of a band of limestones that almost that follows warm water across North America, and so you can find similar stones from down in New Mexico up to Greenland in various spots. And because that's really where those warm waters went across the that sea that was across the middle of North America. But I point out that Tindle Stone has the advantage of having such great qualities as a cut stone, and most of those other stones are beautiful stones, but they tend to separate along layers or beds the way that the mottled limestone up at Lake Winnipeg does, which is Doghead member. So it's one of many beautiful mottled limestones that followed this belt of warm water that went across what is now North America. But all the same, I don't know of any others that have the same construction quality as Tindle Stone.
Yeah, thanks. And this is another question from Megan for Casey. Would you please speak a little bit more about the meanings of your vessel supporting the weight of the stone, or if the weight were to crush the clay vessel?
Right. So in a lot of ways, this work was heavily influenced by reading Dr. Leroy Littlebear's Jagged Worldviews. And he talks about sort of Indigenous worldviews as opposed to colonial worldviews, and the way we look at the world around us. How Indigenous worldview is about thinking like a spider web and how everything is connected. And the colonial manifests itself by extraction. Everything is about extraction. Everything is about taking and using that material for helping and moving forward the community. So that it's really talking about those polar views. One is very land-based, and the other is about creating these sort of outer structures, creating these structures that can support a community, support a society, what many people would call a forward-thinking, forward-moving society. Whereas Indigenous methodologies is really thinking about how ceremonies are used. Ceremonies, songs are constantly repeated because we constantly need to renew ourselves. We need to upkeep everything. So it's really about these two worlds colliding. The clay vessel really talks about these indigenous knowledge systems that existed before colonization existed, before these architecture structures existed. And so they're really sitting on the foundation of indigenous knowledge systems. So that's really the essence of it. The fact that it's holding strong kind of proves my point that you know, our knowledge systems are still very strong and still very much here and still continues to exist. And it's important that settlers learn and understand these knowledge systems, especially if we want to continue having, if we want our survival to continue. I'm not saying we have to go back to the past, but there are lessons that we can learn from the past that can help us move forward in a good way. That was a very long-winded answer, I mean, but.
Thanks, Casey. I was struck by it feels a bit in maybe connected to that a little bit, but in talking about how you were mentioning how the vessels would be buried again in the land, and that both being reflected in your piece in how it's surrounded by raw clay, but also just thinking about it's something that's come from the material and that will go back to it. Yeah, being significant, a specific way of relating to materials from place that I think it can extend to stone. You can extend to stone use as well.
Yeah, it's really another thing that's like that you wouldn't think about, because we don't often think about this, is the humidity in the air. So by the climate control in a gallery space, there's a certain level of humidity that we can't see, but we can feel it on our skin. We can feel that. And so really that water, that was my one concern, was like the water penetrating that clay vessel and weakening it a little bit. And yeah, so far it's fine, but it's interesting how all those elements are part of that, the exhibition. We may not see it, but it's there.
There's a piece in the exhibition by Jason DeHaan that is adding more moisture to the gallery space that touches on that and is a bit of a preparator's nightmare. But it is a diffusing humidity around fossils that are resting on top of kind of like home humidifiers, kind of speeding up that process, but hopefully at enough of a distance from your piece. I have a comment to share from Manuel, who's saying, I find this topic fascinating as these different rocks found around the world can teach us about the story of our planet, which is so true. And I think it maybe flows into another thing that I was thinking about that kind of traces through all of your presentations, thinking about how we learn about things or teach ourselves about things mediated through other things and that other places and other materials. And that felt most expressed in Mariana in your work, talking about these two different stones, but that have histories that there are parallels between. And Mariana and Casey, you've talked about in kind of these different periods in your life. Yeah, I don't know if I think I was just adding another statement to that. Yeah. Oh yeah, Blair's saying, and they're such different stones. Mariana, both the volcanic stone and Tindle Stone.
Yeah, like this one is sort of teeming with life, and then this other like volcanic stone is like glassy mirror. And yeah, I don't imagine anything kind of emerges from it. Maybe Graham knows.
Yeah, I think that's the crux of it, that it's forming from a volcano that But yeah.
Totally different ways of forming, but used in kind of similar ways. It's really fascinating, all of your talks. Thank you.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting to just like, because I happen to be working with these two types of stones, but just thinking about how the volcanic stone is like naturally expelled by the earth, where the Tyndall Stone, well, the fact that it like crops out in certain areas in Manitoba, I think I just learned that recently through Abby organizing this exhibition. But I guess otherwise, it's like human extraction. So yeah, just kind of interesting to think about like the different ways that these stones come into our hands, I guess. And yeah. I also really liked how, I think in your curatorial essay, Abby, you mentioned that I think you describe it something as like the Red River Formation kind of like undulating or something like that. And we even saw it in one of Graham's diagrams where it kind of goes like that. So I thought it was interesting how it like is such a big formation, but it comes to the surface in different areas. So yeah, I just really love learning all about this.
Oh yeah, I thank you, Mariana. Yeah, I'm curious if that the like that being part of this layer cake formation is in part of what it contributes to it not being being something that's primarily comes to the surface through extraction. But there's yeah.
The landscape that's associated with that sort of geological structure, I would say, because in a flat landscape, it's very hard to find natural geological outcrops, except for instance, the ones that were known along the Red River where there were rapids, that sort of place, where water was cutting into the bedrock. Otherwise, because it's a flat landscape, because it had an overprint of Lake Agassiz, which just spread clay over everything, that it was something that had to be found. Yeah, it's kind of a hidden secret underneath. And the geology across southern Manitoba, once you're west of the Broken Head River, is so easy to understand because it is just that layer cake. And as you go west across southern Manitoba, you're always going to go into younger rocks. So that we go west from here, as you get out towards the escarpment, you're actually up into the age of dinosaurs. Whereas the Ordovician's twice as old as that, where we are. So you go to eastern Manitoba and get on the shield, and it's just crazy because it's incredibly complicated. It's all folded and faulted, and we had lots of volcanoes here if you go far enough back. But they're back in the billions of years.
I want to get this question in. We're over our time here, but from KC to Graham, because I'm curious about it too. Graham, are you familiar with Red River Church? Ooh,
not very, and I have seen it, but do you know where this was found or sourced from?
So this was sourced from Lockport, and and so in Lockport, this kind of material, like Knife River Flint was in South Dakota, right? And so it's an ideal knapping because for making tools, because it's so glass-like. But Red River Chert, this is what they used, and this is a flake that came off, and this was used from the Lockport area. So I sourced this right at Lockport, and I'm looking at it. I looked it up, and then what does that say? It comes from crinoid stems.
Aha.
Oh.
And that it's in outcroppings throughout the Red River Basin, Minnesota, and it extends from southern Manitoba to eastern and North and South Dakota. But this was so important to like your way of life, to be able to have chert meant you were able to cut and you were able to like create tools. So I think it's interesting how also like these kind of rocks that, I guess this is a fossil, right?
Well, it's made of fossil
Made of
material.
fossil
And a lot of it came from things like sponges because they had silica skeletons, and that got redistributed in the rock after it was deposited. But yeah, there's quite a lot of chert in Selkirk stone and Tindle Stone in places, and I think and actually there's a lot of chert above, if you look at drill core, above Tyndall Stone, below Selkirk Stone, which is probably why people have never extracted from those intervals, because it tends to make the stone crumbly. But I've seen there's beautiful chert up at Cathead Macbeth Point on the North Basin. There's actually a beach that's largely beautiful chunks of sculptural chert. They're all like little, they're like little sculptures and different colors. Quite hard. So if you ever have the chance to travel on that part of the North Basin, stop just on the north side of Macbeth Point. It's really worth it.
Cool.
Well, yeah, I was aware of it being like a significant material for tools, and then also knew from that it was something that is that shows up in lower beds within the quarries at Garson and is not ideal for that. So I was curious, and so thank you for asking that, Casey, because I have heard of this of Selkirk chert, and I was curious if that comes exclusively from the limestone or it's its own, like deposited on its own. So it sounds like it is.
Yeah, I should learn more about the Selkirk chert. Definitely.
I'm just
Okay,
learning about it.
I have just a couple comments and another question, and then we'll get to wrapping this up. So School of Arca, I think this might be Justin, says both stones make me think of sweat lodges. Yes, good. Do you want to say your own question or your own comment?
Do you want me to say to the comment? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Here, I'll put myself on video. I'm in the dark right now because of the light. Yeah, so both of the stones, I really like this. Oh, my light's off. I really like this show because I often think about both those rocks when I'm in the lodge. Because when you're picking rocks for the sweat lodge, you don't want limestone. And most of that limestone, it's not going to be Tyndall. But I think about like lime like a lot and that type of like sand-based stone a lot with the sweats, and they explode when you put them in the lodge, so we avoid them. But the volcanic rock, and Mariana's talking about volcanic rock in Mexico, and we have quite a bit of volcanic rock all over. And a lot of BC, and we love that volcanic rock because you can use it many, many, many times over and over and over again. So yeah, that's just something that I was thinking of about this show and Mariana's kind of comparison. And no, it's not really a question, just observation.
Maybe just quickly squeeze in, because I was thinking about how Graham also mentioned that there used to be volcanoes like in this area. So I don't know if Justin has a comment back on this, but I'm wondering like where this volcanic rock is coming from that you mentioned in BC, or like when Graham mentioned that, I was wondering how much of that volcanic rock might still be around.
There's a lot of it, but a lot of it is up the east side of Lake Winnipeg. That's where we get people bringing it in quite often because they think they found meteorites, and it's a black. It's also typically after it was lava, it was buried deep and underwent some metamorphism. So we call it a metavolcanic. Tends to be quite hard. It doesn't look as much like fresh lava, but some of it's very dark in color, dark and heavy.
All right.
And you can sometimes find it places like Birds Hill gravels if you look for it. Lots of chunks of metavolcanic there.
Graham, I have a whole bag of like rocks that I've found in Lockport.
So you can, yeah. And Kevin has showed me some of that Lockport.
Yeah.
Kevin Brownlee has showed me some of that Lockport chert, but I have to say I don't know much about it. So
Yeah, I have the grandfathers we use for like sweats. This was actually like weakened. It was heated up and then put into either a vessel to boil. So they're called fire cracked rock. And then this is one of my black. Is this considered like volcanic rock? Like it's
is it heavy?
It's kind of heavy. Yeah.
It's probably one of those metavolcanics that originated in that eastern. There's a whole series of belts of that sort of rock up the east side of Lake Winnipeg.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I love collecting like different styles of rocks, but I don't have enough geology friends.
And I don't know enough geology, but Tindle Stone I'm pretty good on.
Well, I think we should probably wrap it up here. But I want to thank you, all three of you, for your presentations. They have my mind racing and thinking about this material in different ways. Yeah, and I want to thank the audience for being here. I think one of the things that really has stuck with me that also went through your threads through your presentation is, and that really, I didn't expect you to say, Graham, it really opened things up for us to think about the stone as being full of life. Yeah, I think that was such a exciting thing to begin with and carry through each of your presentations.
Well, thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much to everyone. These were fascinating conversations, and just thank you so much. I hope you all bring your special rocks to the opening.
Yeah.
Let's see everybody.
Thanks for all the great comments and questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you for
all your
listening.
help. Thanks, Graham. Marianne.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, and so the exhibition is come meet us at the exhibition in real life next week. I'll be giving a chat in the afternoon, and then from 5 to 8. The gallery's open all day, but there's a reception in the evening from 5 to 8.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your evening.
Nice. Bye.
Bye.